Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a Tilt webinar with Thomas Smith, Migrating Language Learning and Teaching Completely Online in a University Language Centre. And the title is Dipping Our Toes in the Water. So remember that title because you're going to like this presentation. There's a nice little image for that. So it's Thursday, the 10th of June, 2021. I'm Helen Myers. I'm chair of the London branch of the Association for Language Learning. Absolutely delighted to be able to host these webinars. But the person who's really been putting this all together, because he's the one who makes all of these wonderful friends who he then introduces to us, is Joe Dale. So Joe, would you like to introduce yourself before later on you introduce Thomas to us?
Oh, thanks, Helen. That's lovely. Well, we're really excited about our session tonight. But I will introduce Thomas a bit later on. But a little bit about me. For those people that don't know me, I'm an independent languages consultant working incredibly hard during the pandemic, trying to support language teachers all over the world as part of my day job, as well as doing free Tilt webinars as well, which will always stay free. But in the chat, I've just put in a selection of different sessions I can offer to people around hybrid and remote teaching ideas. So particularly, let's say, if you have an inset at the start of the new academic year, at the end of August, if you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland, or at the start of September, if you're in England or Wales, then feel free to consider asking me to come along to do a session at your school, or later on in the autumn term. I would love to hear from you. But I'm also here completely for free as well, via Twitter and via Facebook Messenger to support as well. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you for all you do. I'm obviously would like to promote the Association for Language Learning. If you're a member of ALL, please use the chat now to say that you're a member and that you like to be a member and you think other people should be members too. That would be great. We've got lots and lots of webinars coming up soon. You've got a link there. So on Friday, that's tomorrow, we've got something for new teachers. Lots of people have signed up already for Saturday morning when we've got lots of good speakers coming along there. And that's going to be particularly Greg Horton talking about speaking skills, developing spontaneity. Stephen Fawkes is going to be talking about a title called The Curious Things We Do in Our Curious Language Lesson, something like that. But anyway, that will be fun because we do curious things. We are different from other subject areas. And also Benoit is going to tell us what's on at the French Institute. And we'll be finishing off with a show and tell. So it'd be great if you could come and sign up for that. We're delighted that we're bringing in other subjects as well. We've never had an Arabic webinar before. That's coming up on the Thursday, the 17th of June. And that same day in the evening, Nick Brown's going to talk us about EPQ. And Chinese language zone and launch will be on Wednesday, the 23rd of June. There's a June Roadshow conversation. That's the wrong date there. It's the 30th of June. That's for ALL. Heidi Trude is coming a second time on Thursday, the 24th of June. 25th of June for secondary teachers. We're having a little get together there. And there are two more that Joe has lined up for us. Dr. Peggy Semmington's coming on the 8th of July and Esther Park is coming on the 15th of July. And then we'll probably have our holiday, I expect. But this is what we're here for today. And I'm now going to pass over to Joe to introduce our speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I saw Thomas speak at the recent AULC conference. So AULC is the Association of University Language Centres, and Thomas is the manager of the Language Centre at Queen's University Belfast. The session that Thomas gave was a shortened session, but I was really, really impressed and inspired by it. And I thought it would be lovely if Thomas could do an extended, fuller version for us as part of the Tilt webinar series. And I was absolutely thrilled when Thomas said that he would. And so I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask Thomas to share his screen, but I think Helen is actually going to share the presentation, and then Thomas will lead us through the ways in which the Language Centre at Queen's has coped with the pandemic and all the different things that they put into place. So are we able to share the presentation, Helen?
Let me just pause the recording.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Helen. Really appreciate all of the introductions there. If I could just ask everybody to make sure that they're on mute, because perfect, brilliant. Thank you all very much. And thank you for the invitation to come and to speak with you this evening. It's been great, Joe, getting to meet you and to speak with you and to share ideas with you. And indeed, thanks, Joe, for the work that you've done with our language tutors in terms of helping them to think about different tools they could use for online teaching, and to support interactivity in the online classroom, which I'm sure that is a phrase that at this stage of 15 months into these Tilt webinars, I'm sure that's a phrase that we've heard a lot, trying to foster and curate interactivity in the online classroom and live online classroom. I'm sure it's given a lot of you nightmares in the same way that it's given us some nightmares. But today's session hopefully is going to be a positive session. It's going to be a positive reflection of what was not necessarily always a positive 15 months. It was quite a challenging 15 months. And yeah, you've introduced me already. My name is Thomas Smith. I'm the manager of the Language Centre at Queen's. And I know that some of the people joining us and viewing this session might be engaged in language learning and teaching in different contexts at primary, secondary, tertiary level, and in lots of different contexts. And language centres are sort of a smaller cohort, if you like, of the overall language learning and teaching community across all of those different contexts. But generally speaking, we exist in different ways in different institutions, but we exist to support the development of language skills in undergrad and postgrad students, and the staff in our institutions, and in the wider public as well. I've titled the session today, Dipping Our Toes in the Water, because it very much felt like that's what we were doing in moving our whole offer online. But in terms of e-learning, in the fields of e-learning, we certainly weren't dipping our toes in the water there. We did have a number of existing blended learning programs, e-learning resources that supported in-class synchronous teaching, as well as bespoke programs as well that used a lot of technology in their delivery for delivery at distance and things like that. So it wasn't our first rodeo, if you like, in having to come up with solutions in the past 15 months. But I suppose today's session seeks to share the experience of the Language Centre team at Queen's in the wake of the impact of the pandemic taking hold since March 2020. And as we all know, it's still having an impact today. In the immortal words of Dean Martin, there have been a lot of times during the past 15 months where it's simply been showing no signs of stopping. And like I say, hopefully this will share with all of you kind of a human experience of what myself and my fellow team members and the tutors in the Language Centre, and some of our experiences, some of the logic, some of the ideas, and some of the ways in which we've approached the challenges of the past 15 months, and what we've learned from that. And a lot of our approach has indeed been done with the hope of learning something, the primary hope of learning something from it and understanding how we can do things better. Primarily, we'll be looking at two key projects today. So the two key projects, the first project is entitled Lockdown Language Learning. I'll talk a lot more about these. I'm just going to summarize them now. That was really an offer which we used in order to pilot, in many ways, online delivery and online support in a couple of new contexts, and a way for us to learn what the key issues would be for a language centre trying to support this kind of learning. Trying to support tutors, trying to support learners, trying to make sure that the tech works, trying to make sure that pedagogically our tutors were supported and able to use different tools and platforms well, and all of that. And the second project I'll look at then will be the broader development project, I guess, which had to happen between last, let's say, June, July, and September, October time, in order for us to return to offering some semblance of our Languages for Non-Specialist program, or LNS program. Our Languages for Non-Specialist program, pre-COVID, was offered in over 20 languages at a range of levels. All of the over 20 languages were offered at beginner level, and Spanish, French, and German, for example, would go right up to post-A level standards. So a range of languages taught at a range of levels consistently year in, year out. Was what we went into COVID with, and what we had to then all of a sudden find solutions for was how do we do all of that online? Elements of it, or an increasing number of kind of elements of it where we're going online, we're becoming online. But I'd say we were probably about 90% versus 10% face-to-face versus online. We were very much a face-to-face language centre. And in that, we've got that whole journey from the initial how do we re-understand our roles as in a language centre as language support officers, as we call them in Queen's, and how do we develop effectively moving forward? How can we do what we were doing in this current new context that was sprung upon us, if you like? So we're all familiar with the context. I don't think I need to talk to you about the fact that over the past 15 months, work has looked a little bit different than it ever did before. But like I said, this is our experience. These are the questions that we came up against, and some of the solutions that we suggested, moved forward with and executed in order to try and to provide something was still productive, that was still positive, and that was still useful to learners. Before I begin, I suppose I wouldn't mind trying to crowbar a little bit of poetic metaphor into this. These are Chinese characters which represent the idea Wei Ji. Wei Ji represents the Chinese idea of a crisis. However, Wei Ji is made up of two components. The first character on the left-hand side is Wei, which represents crisis, and the Ji then often represents opportunity. Specifically in this context, it represents the opportunity that could potentially arise from the crisis. And I hope that on reflection, whenever I get to the end, we will see that there were opportunities in it. And that whilst we didn't get everything right, and we certainly didn't get everything right first time, that the amount that we have learned has been positive, and that the opportunity for us to have been able to move forward and push forward with a lot of development, both of ourselves, of our tutors, and of the resources that exist to support online learning, will be a positive thing on reflection. There's so many people to thank. I appreciate that I'm not receiving an Oscar, and so I don't want to thank people for 20 minutes. But the Language Centre team at Queen's is made up of myself, Mrs. Brenda Davis, Dr. Liang Wang, and Dr. Poppy Boyd, all of whom have done just an amazing job in supporting all of what I'm about to talk about. And as well, the tutors are the real heroes in all of this. It is they that have had to adapt and that have had to do have had to deliver language teaching, which is something that they're so comfortable with, and that they are so capable of, with a whole new set of challenges in the past year. So the first idea that I wanted to talk to you about goes right back to the start. It goes right back to March 2020, and the situation whereby all of a sudden on the 24th of March, I think it was specifically, we all went home. We all took our computers home, and we started to do our day jobs, sitting in our living rooms, sitting in our bedrooms, sitting in wherever it was. We're all very familiar with this experience, I'm sure. And as a language centre, what that meant for us in Belfast was that we had to finish our face-to-face classes a week early. We couldn't come back onto campus to complete those. And really, we had to cancel the third semester courses that were due to begin in April as well. And so it kind of left us with a sort of sense of, I don't know what you would call it, maybe a crisis of identity. You know, what are we if we aren't face-to-face? Because so much of what we do, not just the face-to-face language teaching, but cultural awareness training, tandem learning exchange, face-to-face meetings with colleagues, so much of what we did as a language centre was face-to-face and on campus. And so we had to re-understand our roles, as did so many people across the world. And we also had to re-understand, I guess, a little bit the language centre offer, and reevaluate what the best way would be in the short term, in the medium term future, certainly with this new working and indeed living scenario of being in lockdown and all of the restrictions that brings with it. As it says, as you can see, the idea of lockdown language learning was what we came down on. It wasn't the first idea that we had. We had a number of ideas and umpteen development discussions around how we could do it. But essentially what the driver for lockdown language learning was that key point that if you all cast your minds back to March 2020, everybody at the start of lockdown was talking about what they were going to do with these new daily routines. They were going to start reading more. They were going to pick up an instrument that they put down years ago. They were going to develop a skill. And they were going to spend more time, being mindful at this difficult time. And a lot of the blogs, the online kind of videos and different social media content, a lot of the content that was out there was talking about how you might be able to develop your language skills, be a great way to use this time during lockdown. And that certainly spoke to us. And that was kind of a mission call for us, if you like. How can we respond to that? How can we offer something that would benefit as many people as possible, as positively as possible? And certainly the idea evolved from initially an idea which I think encompassed a range of levels and encompassed a range of delivery models and things like that. We simplified it down to something that was, we believed, achievable, something that would give us an opportunity to pilot online delivery of language teaching with the platforms that we would hope to use then going forward more sustainably. Lockdown language learning was a one-off temporary offer. It ran from April until August time. And the idea behind it in the end, what it boiled down to, was to encourage people to consider picking up a new language by providing a structured and regular platform to interact with language teaching content and live online clinics. I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But really the reason we came down on this was because, and we speak to students at Queen's all the time about multimodal language learning and increasingly what that can look like in 2021. and the importance of routine and habit forming behaviors in developing your language skills, how we can be watching Spanish or French or German or Chinese or Korean series on maybe Netflix or movies or YouTube videos, or engaging with interviews with interesting people in these languages. As we all know, the internet is a vast, expansive space that contains many beneficial resources for language learning. The Duolingo effect has really taken hold, the idea of learning a language on the go, learning a language regularly, doing that routinely. We really wanted to try and encourage people to, if they were going to pick up a new language, to start to do something that would give them a structure, to start to develop that routine, to start to curate that routine, something that they could do a number of times a week that would have them coming back to and engaging with consistently in a structured way their language skills. So what we decided to do then was to offer 8 beginner resources. And you can see the list of languages there: Chinese, French, German, Irish, Italian, Japanese, Latin, and Spanish. And those resources combined asynchronous, pre-recorded teaching video content. And there were 5 weeks or 10 weeks, if it was a 5-weekly one. There were 5 weeks of content with 2 hours of pre-recorded content each week. Those 2 hours of pre-recorded content each week were broken up into smaller, shorter videos, so 10, 15, 20-minute videos. And they were language teaching videos. They were developed by our language center tutors, many of them that had obviously experience of teaching beginners, and so had a range of resources at their disposal. But certainly they had to redevelop and recreate the content for these 5-week programs. And the pre-recorded teaching video content was then followed up on with live clinics. And this was really important for us. This was something that we obviously wanted the opportunity to pilot ourselves, but certainly something that we felt strongly about in terms of it not just being a resource where we put up a number of videos, people watch them, and that's that. We really want people to engage with it and to want to go further with it. And so that is what we put together. Like I say, for those 8 different languages, we had 5 weeks with 2 hours each week, so 10 weeks altogether, 2 hours each week of short videos that looked at different areas of beginners, kind of grammar, greetings, introducing yourselves, things like that. And those videos were often slightly more informal, perhaps, than the classroom environment might be, or often language classrooms face-to-face can be very informal spaces because of the social nature of the learning environment. But they were informal in terms of tutors were in their videos reflecting the fact that, isn't it strange that we're in lockdown now? And they were kind of making it very relevant to everybody that I suppose was living in this strange new world. And it was quite nice to have communities coming together of people to access those resources. I hope that that's clear then. I feel like I've made it clear that there were 2 hours each week of pre-recorded content followed up by the live clinics. What we did was we used Microsoft Forms. We supported the pre-recorded videos rather through using our own website, our university website. And on the pages, we would have all of the videos relating to each week's content. And we would also have 2 Microsoft Form links that people could click. One link was to sign up to attend the live clinic. The second link was to submit a question in advance for the live clinic. So if there was something you'd like to hear more on, you didn't understand, or just a general question that you had about the content, the language learning, you could submit that. We shared that with the tutor, and that allowed the tutor to prepare for the live clinics with some pre-supplied questions. They could also take questions live on the clinics, which were delivered using Teams, as well as responding live to anybody that perhaps unmuted themselves and asked as well. And those clinics interestingly looked different for different languages. In Italian, for example, we had a lot of what just felt like immediately an online classroom with listen and repeat type activities. And in other resources, other languages, we found that people were less likely to unmute themselves and to contribute in that way. Did it work? Well, we didn't officially force people to register. We wanted this to be an open access resource that people could access broadly and freely and as widely as possible. And so what we did to try and get a sense of, is anybody out there, is anybody accessing these resources, was to track and set up a dashboard that would show the usage of the pages relating to the support of lockdown language learning. And I'm going to try and share one of those pages in a minute. I'm a little bit worried about my bandwidth if I try and do that for illustration. But as you can see there, the user graph, there was a lot of interest to begin with, and then that kind of rationalized off then as May went on. And whilst it does look like it's flatlining towards the end, you should bear in mind that each one of those bars is 1,000 people. So In May, for example, we had over 1,000 people a day on average accessing the resource, which was really rewarding. It was really great to see that this was working and that the concept was benefiting people at what was a difficult time for us and a difficult time for others as well. Also, and just a very quick reflection then, you can see here that dashboard also tracked where people were accessing the lockdown language learning resources last May until August. We're accessing it from, and logically the UK and Ireland are the most popular places. But it is interesting to me to see number 10, that Kuala Lumpur sits between Glasgow and Lisbon there. I don't think Lisbon and Kuala Lumpur have ever featured on the same list before. So that got a chuckle from me. But it was really rewarding as well to see kind of the global impact, if you like, the fact that people were accessing and able to access these resources worldwide, and that wasn't causing too much of an issue. Like I say, I'm just going to try to share now, and I hope you can see. If anybody can't see this, if it isn't working, if Joe wants to come off mute and tell me that. This is the page, and hopefully you can see the home page. Yes,
yeah, we can see that fine, yeah.
Perfect. So this page is no longer open and accessible anymore. This is kind of, it's living on the Queen's content management platform somewhere. And what you can see is the week 1 content for Lockdown Irish, for example. What we had at the top there, you can't really see it very well, but this link was live, and you could see the text that said submit questions for the live clinic on Wednesday, the 13th of May, or request to join the live clinic here. So that's where people got the access and the ability to submit their questions beforehand. And John Tracy, Dr. John Tracy, I should say, who was our Irish language tutor for this offer. You can see the nature of the videos there. I'll just try, and I'm not sure that I have included my audio as I needed to. I may stop sharing and reshare just in order to do that.
If you go up to more options on the floating toolbar at the top, you should be able to click on that and then click share sound.
Okay. Yes, perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Joe. So I'll just to give you a small flavor and an insight into it, I'll click play on John's video.
And this means describe yourself. Jan Kershis Art Hien. So the first word here is Jan. That's a verb, to do something or to make.
Okay, I'll not labor too much on that, but you get the idea that we had a number of videos making up 2 hours of pre-recorded asynchronous content. And then what we did as well for people that weren't able to attend the live clinic was to record the live clinic, as you can do on Teams, and then to upload that recording to the same page that week's resources had been put up onto. So you get a sense of it here. Maybe just a quick look into the first week's live clinic, hopefully. So apologies for the slide delay. Oh, that's not going to play ball. Well, I'll not labor too much over this one. No, it doesn't look like it's going to go for me.
And I'm sure lots of learners struggle with the same thing. And you're right about English. English is a bit of a free-for-all. There's no indication of worry, stress.
That wasn't a deliberate dig at anybody there, or the English language, indeed. However, as you can see there, that gives you a sense of how the questions were shared during the clinics, and there was a combination of the pre-submitted questions and the delivered or the live questions that were asked during delivery. Like I say, we offered this program in the hope of supporting people to develop their language skills during lockdown at a time when a lot of people were talking about wanting to do that, and there was a perceived demand for that. And like I said, with the numbers that you saw previously, there was really positive take-up of that. We didn't do an academic study on this to try and ascertain what the learning outcomes exactly were in terms of what we'd achieved, in terms of progress levels and things like that. Really what we wanted to do was create something that was as broadly beneficial as possible and that would benefit as many people as possible. And like I say, I'm pretty happy that we did that. We didn't seek formal feedback. We didn't keep people's details that were accessing the resource. And indeed, the majority of people that accessed the resource did so kind of anonymously. They just accessed them on the webpage and didn't interact with us as a language center. But we did have some really nice unsolicited feedback, if you like. And a lot of how that feedback really spoke to the pedagogical strengths nearly of the resource, given the quick turnaround and the lack of really development time that we had to put these resources together. We maybe only had 3 or 4 weeks to go from agreeing to do it to starting the offer and putting it out there. And the real litmus test for this resource for lockdown language learning was, publishing it, making it open and accessible, and hoping that everything worked as we had hoped. So it was really nice to get some feedback, like the feedback. I'll just flick through some of them here. Somebody that had been trying to learn Irish for the past year and a half, and that had really enjoyed John Tracy's approach, and he really was a fantastic tutor, as were all of the tutors indeed. Like I say, these kinds of comments, the presentation and pace were excellent. We were delighted with that. We felt like we were getting credit for something that we hadn't done our due diligence on, because it was as much by coincidence that the presentation and pace were so good, and it was all down to the great work that the tutors were able to do in creating the actual content that was used. Again, the technology, pace, and structure were all superb, and I now have a sound basis for continuing on in my quest to learn the language. That was it. That was what we wanted to do and achieve. We wanted to get people started when everybody wanted to pick up a language. We wanted to give them something structured and routine that they can engage with to begin with, to then take forward. And then, of course, wanted to thank Maura for being such a funny and engaging tutor. She is a funny and engaging tutor. She's a fantastic Italian tutor as well. And like I say, in the Italian classes, there was that kind of just innate, natural, listen and repeat engagement. Everybody was putting themselves on video on those clinics, which we were surprised with. Everybody was contributing for some of those clinics. And that was really great to see how different tutors were able to encourage that in different ways. This is maybe a slightly more depressing reflection. And this was not our intention, but certainly we had a learner there asking if we could continue and keep doing this, because it was a real highlight in lockdown for them. And like I say, all of that feedback was really, really great to receive. It was like an elixir, because obviously whenever you're pitching these ideas to begin with, and you're working within the university to talk about, okay, it's lockdown, we have a desire at the minute to try and help people, not just our staff and our students, but also broader society in any way that we can. This was a really nice way of doing it and achieving it, and the feedback, like I say, really reinforced what was a nice KPI to have, which was to have a positive impact and to support people to positively make progress and develop. What did we learn? Well, we learned that asynchronous content supported by the live clinic worked, that it was quite effective. Was it the best way to do it? Was it the best way to do language learning? No, not necessarily, but certainly it worked in getting us started, and it worked in what we were trying to achieve with the offer. We certainly learned that we needed significant development to achieve quality. We achieved really great quality. We were happy with the quality that we achieved, particularly given the time frame that we had to turn it around in. But certainly that in order to achieve really good quality asynchronous content, that takes time, and it takes consideration, and it takes a lot of work and development. And again, my hats off to the tutors for what they were able to achieve in it. In terms of Microsoft Teams, and this was very much where we were piloting it, because we really had in mind that in September and October, going back to our core offer, that Microsoft Teams was going to be an important element of that in facilitating the live interactive teaching. The processes and administrations around Teams, it took some doing, but I think it was manageable, and it was much more manageable for us because we had that experience with lockdown language learning. And yeah, the core functions for the language tutor there, really, what did we learn? We learned very quickly what it was important to be comfortable with to begin with. And then we started to understand then how, for example, the chat function in Teams is actually a very useful way of encouraging engagement. We learned that encouraging people to turn on their mics and their videos, we had mixed experiences with that, and we learned that was something we maybe needed to think about. The danger of success, what I mean by that at the end, was that with the numbers and the usage numbers and the access numbers that we had in the end, we had, I suppose, a lot of colleagues at Queen's maybe thinking, well, if you had that level of success with this temporary online offer, would we not then carry that forward into our core offer, because it's kind of proven and it works well. But I'm sure you can all appreciate in the language learning and teaching community why we were very keen to bring the focus back into the live teaching element of it. And certainly we wanted to bring forward elements of asynchronous support to our online teaching, but we did not want it to be predominantly pre-recorded material. We did not want that to lead on our teaching, and we didn't want that to replace it. We also learned things like sound control was so important. You know, it's things that are all bread and butter to us now because we've had a year of Teams calls. But how important it was to make sure we actually had to facilitate all of the live clinics so that the tutors weren't on their own in there. I was in there, or Poppy was in there, or Leanne was in there, or Brenda was in there, just making sure that everybody was on mute if there was any disruption, any feedback and things like that. So that was the kind of learning that we were able to take out of lockdown language learning and into development of the LNS, of the Languages for Non-Specialist offer. That moves me on then to the second kind of project. I wonder if this is a logical break just now. Joe, maybe if there are any questions in there, if there's anybody that would like to come off mute and ask me a question, I'd be happy to take one.
That's perfect, Thomas. We've got a question, and we're wondering as well if you could maybe just stop sharing your screen and reshare it, because your video stopped there for a moment. But while we're doing that, we've got a question from Helen McFarlane, which is the following. It's a nice meaty question, so it's great. Which is the following: Are you teaching fully online, or do you plan to introduce blended learning from September 2021? What impact has online language learning had on student numbers and uptake for A, Languages for All, and B, joint honours degrees with languages?
Okay, I'd love to be able to see that question actually. How do I?
It's in the chat. Can you see the chat? Have I put it in the chat for you?
If I just perhaps stop sharing, I can see the chat if I stop sharing. That might be a better way.
Yeah. Okay, if you stop sharing, it's in. I'll put it in the chat at the latest.
Yeah.
There we are. So it's in the chat now.
So are we teaching fully online, or do we plan to introduce blended learning? At the minute this year, since September 2021, which I actually haven't got to in this session yet, I'm still on before September 2021. Since September 21, right up until now, we are still teaching fully online. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in a minute, so I'll not go into that too much more. What impact has online language learning had on student numbers and uptake? Well, we've had to reduce our offering by about 40%, and our numbers are down by something similar. So there is an argument that's a little bit too high level, but there is an argument to say that we haven't actually experienced a significant dip in interest or in numbers. And in terms of Languages for All, that's what I'm talking about. And in terms of joint honours degrees, I couldn't speak to that as well as somebody from the academic side of our School of Arts, English and Languages at Queen's. They could speak to the admissions numbers there and things like that. But certainly I can speak more to the Languages for All programs and the numbers there, yeah. Wazim, I'd love to come to your question again, but it's a huge question. How can we captivate students online? I think I'll maybe come back to that at a slightly later stage. And hopefully that was, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly who the question was from there.
That was from Helen McFarlane. So
thanks, Helen.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Helen.
That's fantastic.
And like I said, at the end of this session, if anybody wants to take my email address and follow up with me, if I can explain anything more, I'd really love to do that. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen again and move on then to the experience of getting ourselves ready. And Joe, is that okay now? I'm hoping everybody can see the screen well now.
It's just coming up now. Yeah, all good. Fantastic.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So, like I say, that was our short offer that lasted from May until August. It was open and available to everybody on our website, and it had quite good interaction, and we learned a lot from it, in a nutshell. And we learned a lot, which then informed how we went about developing our core offer, our LNS, Languages for Non-Specialist offer. We were able to develop and roll out language learning courses in 14 different languages at a range of levels. And it's been amazing, the work that the tutors have done. I'm going to say that as many times as I possibly can in this session. Apologies for the repetition. What we decided on in terms of reformatting these courses, like I say, there were colleagues that were observing that the 2 hours of pre-recorded content had worked quite well, but we as Language Centre staff certainly felt like that should not be something that we carry forward, that was an exercise in accommodating for scale rather than really doing things the way that we had done them in the way that we wanted to do. And so what we changed then was using an online platform called Learning Branch. We collated a range of resources. So our core courses are 10-week programs with, in a face-to-face environment, 1 2-hour taught class per week. In an online environment, what we decided to do was reduce the time for the live teaching session to 90 minutes. And a lot of the best practice out there would say that even the live teaching sessions should be shorter than that again. We went with 90 minutes. We shortened it to 90 minutes with a break in there, and we supported it. We we supported the weekly live teaching session with a pre-class teaching video of 5 to 10 minutes to introduce an idea that was going to be then further developed within the class. So it might be a grammar point, it might be a new verb tense, it might be a new idea around adjectives, depending on the languages and depending on the level. And then we also created for after the class sets of weekly post-class exercises. Excuse me. And those post-class exercises, as you might have assumed, sought to follow up on what was taught in the class. Using Learning Branch, we were able to use a lot of different exercise types. So exercises where students were recording themselves, so they could do a lot of pronunciation practice at beginner levels, or they could record themselves in more complex exercises with model recordings from the tutor, meaning that we had auto feedback, essentially. They could compare their recording to the tutor recording in a way that wouldn't require mass feedback from the tutors for all of the learners. That has worked quite well. I'll not just leave that there. I'll look at, again, some of the feedback and findings from that. But that was the plan, if you like, last kind of July. What we had to do was develop all of these 5 to 10 minute pre-class teaching videos for the 14 languages at the range of levels that we were offering them for each of the 10 weeks. And then the weekly post-class exercises, similarly for the 14 languages, for all of the languages that we worked with, all of the levels we were offering them for each of the 10 weeks. And so we worked very closely with the tutors, and the tutors really shone here. They were really fantastic in the work that they were able to do. Obviously, they are the experts in the language that they're teaching and in the level that they're teaching at as well. And so they were best placed, I suppose, to speak to which resources might best support, week 5 on a level 2 Spanish course, for example. So a lot of tutor development discussions, agreement over what the right topics would be. Often we have different tutors teaching the same level, and so we needed that consistency there as well, based against the learning outcomes and objectives of the courses. Looked at bespoke training sessions on Teams, the basics, on MediaSite. The MediaSite was the platform that we used to create the pre-class videos, and all relevant trainings that kind of went with it. We then had to explain to everybody that we were doing this. We had to promote this new offer to our staff and students and to members of the public, as well as then administering them and getting the registration right, getting the people added to Microsoft Teams in the right way. The way that we did it, we created teams within Microsoft Teams for each individual course. And I'll talk a little bit about how that was really beneficial actually to a lot of learners. On reflection, some of the things that we didn't foresee, the community that created in the channels in those teams where people were sharing, interesting websites, interesting series they were watching, or interesting resources, and the tutors were able to share, files relating to what was coming up in next week's class and things. That really created a space that we had underestimated in terms of the potential to support language learners. But that was essentially what we set out to do in migrating our proper offer, if you like. Bearing in mind, lockdown language learning was something that we hadn't done before, and it was really a first time and a one-time thing. This was really about how do we get back to doing what we do sustainably, despite the fact that it doesn't look like we're going to get back to face-to-face anytime in the near future. So in terms of feedback from that, I think before I give you feedback, I should perhaps endeavor to share again a sense of what sorry, I'm going to have to log out and log in again. What Learning Branch looked like. I talked about the fact that we created weekly pre-class videos and post-class exercises. Hopefully this is sharing well. Hopefully you can see this. I'll go into Spanish level 1, for example. We have created 87 different resources in the past 15 months. And so it can be a bit of a maze around here. But essentially you can see that you have there, for example, your week 3 pre-class video and your week 3 post-class activities. And there's a range of recording yourself activities where you see that little circle with the SL, and then typed activities, multiple choice activities, comprehension activities, then with the little book beside them as well. To give you a sense of, I'm not sure this is going to play now. Let's make sure, yeah, I'm sharing sound. Just to give you a quick sense of one of the pre-class videos, for example.
In Spanish, we wouldn't say yo gusta. We use what I mentioned earlier.
Okay, I'm not going to put you through watching all of the video, but it's for a flavor of how this looked and how this ended up looking, if you like. So that would be the pre-class video, and then the post-class exercises then. Like I say, a mixture of record yourself type exercises, and then fill in the blanks or type your answer or multiple choice type exercises as well. Broadly speaking, I'm sorry I don't have more time maybe to reflect on that. But what I would like to reflect on is how it worked and the actually it refers to, oh, I'm sorry, I think I might be freezing a little bit. Hopefully you can still see me. Hopefully my connection is still there. The thing that I wanted to draw out of this feedback, as much as it was for lockdown language learning, was the fact that this person had a health problem and it meant that it would affect their ability to attend the face-to-face classes every week. This obviously wasn't our initial concern, if you like, albeit it was fantastic. The whole accessibility side of it, the flexibility side of it, is something that we've talked to nursing and midwifery and medicine students for a long time about, because often they have to be out on placements and so aren't physically on campus. But the idea as well of people that couldn't leave their homes whenever we were offering face-to-face classes, it was really great to consider that being something that we had facilitated in a better way. This was an interesting piece of feedback, I thought, particularly the text in red. I find having yourself on mute and being able to countlessly repeat words and phrases as much as you like, which is probably more than you would speak in a face-to-face class, has been greatly beneficial to my pronunciation. I completely get this. From being in language classes myself, I'd often repeat things in my head that the tutor had just said, but it would really be beneficial for me to say it out loud and practice it out loud, but I don't want to distract everybody else in the classroom. And so that was quite nice feedback to receive and quite interesting for me. Some more positive feedback. I mean, this looks like cherry-picked feedback that I'm showing you just to underline how well this worked. Like I said, we did have a broad range of feedback and we had a broad range of issues as well, I guess, in supporting it. But largely speaking, things worked better than we could have hoped that they could have worked. And the tutors adapted, just fantastically to all of the challenges that it's thrown in. And so many of the questions that we've had to answer in the past year in language learning and teaching have really orbited around that idea of the intangible sense of the class that is lost when you step away from the face-to-face environment and you try to do it through screens. You try to do things through the same screens that we're accessing news and media and watching series and movies and sending emails and engaging with social media, the same screens that we're interacting with so much all day for different purposes are the screens that we all of a sudden sit in the language class for. And that made it tricky. And I think that the feedback that we got was really heartwarming and indicative that we were getting something right. Also, tutors observing, where their students were based and how that was a very different thing from the face-to-face environment, and also a consideration that perhaps the quieter students who normally wouldn't speak in class have the opportunity to calmly prepare the written answer in the chat box. Like I say, the channels that we created de facto whenever we made individual Microsoft Teams for Spanish Level 1 and a Teams team for Spanish Level 2, etc., etc. They created these little communities. They created these little groups of people that were all attending that class, but they could interact with each other asynchronously outside of class time. And that was a really nice thing. Those teams also then went on. I saw some of those teams, they were setting up WhatsApp groups at the end for anybody that was still interested in carrying on language learning and things like that. And that was just fantastic to be able to do that. So the feedback was positive and constructive as well. Generally speaking, and that's just a small flavor of it. Learning Branch, the platform that I've just tried to show you quite quickly. Here's some of the usage report, if you like, for the first semester. And as you can see, it worked. People did come back week on week and engage with it. You can see these are daily figures, and you can see that it dips every weekend. This tragically looks a little bit like what we used to see on the news with the COVID reports and the COVID updates. This is a much more positive thing. This is a much more positive reflection of language learners actively engaging with the online resources that were there to support their courses. And you can see total usage numbers there, showing us that this did work. It worked in the way that we wanted it to work. We didn't want it to work once. We didn't want people to access it once. We wanted people to access it a number of times a week, attend their class once a week, and already they would then have 3 interactions with their language learning week. If they could then couple that with a series on Netflix, perhaps, that they enjoy, or Duolingo, or Deutsche Welle, or any of the platforms that are up there that exist, that are free to access online, or even interviews with interesting people in different languages, whatever is appropriate for them of interest to the student or the learner. I think we have to, in 2021 and looking forward, factor in the scale of the resource that the internet is, and all of the resources that are up there. And I know a lot of these webinar sessions have looked specifically as well at looking using tools in the language learning classroom, but it is a vast range of resources, and if we can be engaging with them regularly to develop our language skills, then I think that whilst I'm not saying we shouldn't go to language courses, I think they are fundamentally important if you really want to make progress and develop your language skills. It's the regularity with which you do it that will dictate how well you do. And like I say, that's why we were so pleased with the outcomes there. What do we learn then from the fuller offer, if you like, from the language for non-specialists offer going online in the past year? Well, we learned a lot. I'm not going to start everything I say with under the current circumstances, but a lot of the positive feedback that I feel we got should be taken in that context. That that this course did excellently well under the current circumstances. That we had to do things working in this way, and that we had to scramble to find solutions in this way. And I'm proud of the solutions that we find, but we are certainly keen to continue to develop, and we have a lot of food for thought for going into next September 21, and how our courses can be amended before then. I've mentioned creating learner communities, the idea that people were sharing a lot on the Teams channels in between the live classes held on Teams each week, which was really great for us. It's sort of supplemented in some ways that social environment that you have, but certainly not in any kind of an authentic way, replacing the classroom environment, the face-to-face classroom environment. A lot of things that we learned around, I suppose the phrase of the year in the language learning and teaching classroom is, if you can just please turn your mic on for me, or if anybody would like to turn their video on, or if anybody wants to answer me in the chat, that sense of the one-way tutor that maybe doesn't have such an interactive class, how can that be facilitated? Like I say, Joe did a fantastic job of coming and speaking to our language centre tutors and things about that. And I know he's done that in so many different instances over the past year. But overcoming that, and do we have policies around screen sharing? Do we have policies around whether or not the sessions are recorded? We have been recording the sessions for anybody that maybe wasn't able to attend them live. But that's sometimes not been the best consideration. I don't know whether we should do that going forward, and it's certainly something that we're talking about now. Also then going forward, I suppose the potential to use breakout rooms, I suppose, more to try and recreate. I know a lot of tutors already using that in the language centre. And some of the observations maybe being that those work best maybe at a post-beginner level, maybe intermediate level and above. Certainly they can be used at beginner level, but perhaps we could maybe look at trying to create an online language lab, if you like, using the online accessible learning branch with more beginner level learners in order to provide them with short activities that they could complete, or short record yourself type activities that they could use to practice. Perhaps not the best use of the live online class, but certainly the kinds of things that we're considering in terms of how we can make them even more interactive and things like that. Another thing, I mentioned that the language communities that were being created, language learner communities that were being de facto created by the teams that we were setting up on Microsoft Teams for each course, and people were making great suggestions and helping each other out and being really supportive. What I think we would probably put into Learning Branch going forward is maybe a list of recommended resources from the tutors, from other learners, and from the Language Centre team indeed, to try and encourage people with that point that I was making earlier around habit forming behavior and developing your language skills by engaging with them regularly and making the most of the online environment to achieve that. How do we achieve the best of both worlds? I wish I had all the answers. I wish I was able to reflect on a year in which we got everything right first time, and that we made all of the right decisions every time. But I am really impressed by the amount of areas that we did very well in, and that we, whilst we're going to develop further, that we have done a really noteworthy job, I think, in the past year. And again, it is down to the tutors in the Language Centre at Queen's, the Language Centre team, and colleagues at Queen's that have supported us, the media side team, the guys looking after teams. All of those people came together really well to support us, and I think that was great. But how do we achieve the best of both worlds going forward? Live teaching accompanied, live teaching in an online context has the potential to support a lot of learners flexibly. which is great, although I don't think that we should overburden the number of people in the live online language classroom. Like I say, the potential to reinforce and support this habit-forming behavior, regular interaction with learning is really bolstered by technology and the platforms that we've been using. I suppose, how do we get the best of both worlds? I think the first thing we have to do is try and understand what I mentioned before, which was the intangible enormity of what is lost in an online classroom versus face. Oh, apologies, it's unstable again. Hopefully people can still hear me. I've seen that it was unstable again. The point I was making was the intangible kind of enormity of what is lost in an online classroom versus the face-to-face class environment, and perhaps the differentiation more of what the live online classroom should seek to achieve and how it should seek to achieve it differently, perhaps, to the face-to-face classroom. But those discussions are still happening in the Language Centre at Queen's with our tutors and on the team as well. But certainly, I think we are getting closer to asking ourselves the right questions. And I think I'm really impressed with the learners, with how they've stuck at it, with the tutors primarily, and how they have developed and managed to find opportunity in the crisis, which brings me back quite nicely at 9 o'clock exactly to Weiji, which is the Chinese word for crisis, with the first character representing crisis and the second character representing opportunity, or the potential for opportunity in that crisis. We were optimistic, if you like, with lockdown language learning going in at the start of lockdown. We were optimistic because we didn't have any reason to believe that it would work or that it would work well. I'm going to choose to be optimistic coming out of lockdown. We were optimistic going into lockdown. I'm going to choose to be optimistic coming out of lockdown. And hope that, particularly given the work that all do, ALL do, that the AULC are doing, that UCML are doing, that MFL Twitterati de facto does, that all of those communities of expertise in language learning and teaching are fostering and driving forward. I think that we can find some really great answers here. And I think the more we speak to each other, the more that we interact, the more that we learn from one another. And certainly my personal experience has been to be able to learn so much from the AULC, as Joe mentioned, and colleagues there. But the broader that conversation is, the further we will go together. And yeah, thank you everybody for your time. I'd love to talk to everybody now if anybody has questions. If anybody would like to contact me further, please, that's my email address, t.smith@qub.ac.uk. But thank you for listening. And I'd love to take this further. I'll just stop sharing.
That was fantastic, Thomas. Thank you so much. I'll just turn my video on as well. We've got a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
So the first question was there any particular pedagogical theory which influenced the design of the classes and activities on Learning Branch, or was it driven more by the lived experience of tutors and instructors, or a mixture of both?
Mixture of both is the quick answer, I guess. Yeah, we really wanted to reflect. I mean, we were certainly looking at best practice in theory and talking to colleagues about the way that they had approached asynchronous resources and development and things like that. But we really wanted to support our tutors' courses as they were now. We wanted to really authentically kind of support development, and that way follow up on what they had taught in their classes in a way that students would find that relevance and would see the progress in that way. It was a mixture of both, I think, is the quick answer to that. certainly happy to take that one forward. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then we've got a sort of a wider question again from Helen McFarlane, talking about the. I mean, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but the Northern Irish decision to scrap the speaking element of GCSE in modern languages, and she wanted to know what you thought about that.
I'm really glad she's given me a platform.
We are recording right now, so go for it.
Okay, but can you beep out the expletives? After
Of course.
No, I mean, travesty is a strong word, I suppose. No, particularly my colleague, Dr. Ian Collin, who people might be familiar with.
Yeah.
At NICEL, I know, Joe, that you know him. He provides a really great voice often whenever decisions like that can be made in secondary education. NICEL work a lot more with primary and secondary education in that context. But no, I was speaking to him recently about it. And it just seems so short-sighted to me to lose that component whenever increasingly the importance of language skills I mean, so many students enjoy the oral exam, number one. For so many students, that's their strength. For so many students, that's why they perhaps enjoy languages more than other academic subjects or subjects that they're studying in school. And I think to take that would have been the case for me, and I know for many other linguists that are friends of mine. And I think to take that opportunity away from them is short-sighted. I understand that it's not being done out of a want of anybody, if you like. It's being done out of a perceived necessity. However, I think that is not the skill set that we want to be diminishing the value of, or the perceived value of in any way, because the reason that we need linguists, I suppose, more broadly speaking in society, is so much more because of not just the ability of a Spanish speaker to be able to speak to a Spanish person, but the ability of more developed and further developed communication skills. We need those in our workplaces. Developed cultural awareness as well. But in terms of that ability to express yourself in another language and understand what's being said to you, that is so much the human experience of learning a language, and to lose the oral exam feels like such a poor decision. I'll see what emails I come into tomorrow after making that statement.
Yeah, I think that's a very diplomatic answer. Well done. That's brilliant. Just going back to Wasim's question about sort of engaging, maybe we could talk about, in your own context, did you get any feedback from the students about how they found the whole process of all the different models that you talked about? Was engagement an issue? Did they find that? Did they find, because of their own? Because obviously everyone's got their own context, as you talked about. Did they find that was a really challenging situation for them in relation to engagement, or how was that dealt with, that sort of in the whole mental health and support of the learners you were working with trying to learn a language during the lockdown using these methods? Was engagement an issue, or how did you deal with that?
Sure, I think there were a lot of classes running in each semester. And so in different classes, there were different experiences for the tutors in terms of how they worked. In terms of the broader experience, you mentioned mental health and the situation that we were all surviving through rather than necessarily thriving through. I feel that the online language classroom in the past year has become something that it never was before. It was kind of an opportunity to engage with that screen for something that was, I think, just by default perceived as more positive. With the screens, as you'll all know, every one of my screens for the past year has informed me that the world is ending, with all of the sensationalist headlines that we've had there. And so I think those spaces really became more social spaces than they could have pre-COVID, if you like. Yeah. In terms of, was interaction difficult? Yes, in certain classes, certainly we have spoken to tutors about how it's more difficult to get the students to be turning on their mics and their videos. In other classes, it's not been so much of a problem. How do we then move that forward and improve on that, generally speaking? Well, I suppose we work with the tutors. We speak with the tutors regularly. We have development discussions with the tutors. We've invited Joe to come over and speak with the tutors. But beyond that, we are in touch, and we have taken so much feedback this year. There's more feedback even that I could share with you now.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting if that's okay. So obviously, as you say, everyone's been through the same experience, but everyone's reacted in a different way. And I've heard that a lot about the issue with not turning on webcams and what have you. But do you think that certainly at secondary level, we've heard feedback that some students have thrived under the lockdown situation because or under the blended or hybrid or remote teaching context they find themselves in, because they're not being distracted by, let's say, other people in the class where they could be if it was a face-to-face issue. Is that with the older learners that you've been working with? Have you found something similar, or have you found that they're saying we really miss the face-to-face? Or because one comment that was made in the chat earlier was people, I think it was Helen again, was saying that she was intrigued that you'd said that 100% of the students said that they would not return entirely to face-to-face classroom teaching now. So that's all to do with engagement as well, isn't it, I think?
Sure, and that statistic, just to clarify, was that we asked the tutors, would you like to, whenever we can return to face-to-face teaching, would you like to not continue teaching online? And 100% of people said, no, I would be happy to teach face-to-face and online as well.
Yeah, well, so that's amazing from a cultural shift. It's amazing.
Sure, yeah. Certainly from where we were in the first couple of weeks of October when those courses were beginning, we had a lot of tutors kind of really unsure about it. We put in the time. We'd spent a lot of time on Teams calls, kind of discussing things, seeing what the issues were with, seeing what the areas that tutors felt they needed support in were. But really, it was one of those kind of suck it and see kind of experiences whereby by the second and third week, actually, we saw a transformation, particularly with the tutors that were most anxious, perhaps about the new mode of delivery and not having the social environment to develop a social competence. But yeah, I think, I don't know that I've lost the run of your question a little bit now. But really, I think that the tutors have adapted. So have I lost the run of your question? What was
no? I think I think just going back to Wasim's question around motivation and engagement. I think it's really interesting to hear about how the staff are engaged and how the students are engaged. But it sounds to me like there's, as I think in other situations as well, cool shift because of the fact that people have had to adapt, and there's been a social element as well as part of, people have wanted to connect and have wanted to make things work and have wanted to, and that's caused a natural engagement, I think, as well. I suppose maybe a little bit like in wartime of churches being more populated than maybe in other times because of the fact that need that working things out together. I think it sounds to me that that's what's happening, that people are making things work, be it the learners or the tutors. It's fantastic. Any sort of final thoughts? I'm sure that once we open up everyone's mic and what have you, I think that there'll be lots of other people that will want to ask more questions. But any sort of final thoughts at this point? Have you covered everything you wanted to cover, for example?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I certainly made it through the presentation this time, which I didn't the last time. But I think, with what you're saying there, I think one of the points that I made in one of the slides, I can't remember which, was kind of under the current circumstances. And I think a lot of things that have happened during the past year, and a lot of the evaluations of them and the considerations of how well they have worked have come with that caveat, under the current circumstances. When we go back to normality, hopefully as soon as possible, what will that mean for online language learning? Will that see a massive drop in demand? Will we see that this is now Pandora's box has been opened and there's a consistent demand? I'm certainly looking forward now to, in September, consolidating and going back to what we had before, our face-to-face program that was well established and quite successful in terms of engagement and impact in numbers. And also this online offer, finding that balance will be an interesting thing to begin with in terms of demand and understanding how to do both things well. I think we certainly still have quite a bit of a way to go in the online class environment in terms of just understanding, how better can we support the tutors, how better can we support the learners, how can we be amending what we're doing, because there's just so much potential, like I said, when you take things into the online environment. Also the idea that now face-to-face students will also have the pre-class videos and the post-class exercises to embellish their teaching as well. We think that we're really happy with that in terms of the way that we've been able to develop our offer. That's where the opportunity was in the crisis, I feel like.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Thomas. That's brilliant. I think if I could ask Helen maybe to turn on her mic and video, and then maybe should we do a group shot, or should we open up? If anyone else has any other questions, maybe we can ask Thomas at this point. What I had,
open their videos if you are here. That's fine. I'm sure you are here. Thank you ever so much for that. It was great, and thank you so much for coming, Thomas. Really enjoyed that. Lots of very good conversation there. Lots of chat, and it's lovely that it's a community, isn't it? Where you've obviously had that success in your own community, but it's something where we've all been sharing everywhere else. We've met people we haven't met before. Great. So
Helen McFarland has asked about whether you can let us open up the videos.
So sorry. Sorry,
Thomas. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, not a problem.
And you can unmute yourself. You can even talk to us, Helen. Nice to see you.
Did you say I can even talk?
You can even talk. We trust you, Helen. Hi there, Eric. Good to see you.
Hi, folks.
Oh.
Baz in there as well, and some people have put in the chat there. Sorry, they had to go, but
that was great.
That was really interesting. Thank you, Thomas, and thanks, Joe and Helen, for passing on the questions and the comments. I think we're all batting from the same team, from the same side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I was absolutely horrified, if I'm honest, when I read the report that the speaking element is going to disappear, because I think the speaking element, if that disappears, then that will feed into A levels, that will feed into first year of university, and so on and so forth. And I just think, what a terrible, terrible decision, and it hasn't been thought through. Some people are suggesting if any element at all is going to disappear, it should be the writing. But being a writing kind of person, I think that is a very high sacrifice as well. So I just think the whole thing needs to be protected and saved. And we need speaking, because I think, well, I'm sure that I'm sure we've all had similar experiences, that when we start talking in a foreign language, it's as though we can reinvent ourselves. We have a different personality, we have a different appreciation, our worldview changes. And if we're talking about having this perspective of, this worldwide, and I think if you take away the speaking, it's like cutting off your arm. I just don't understand it, and I think it's a very bad decision made by people who are completely unqualified to make it.
Can I just check? It isn't permanent. This is only because of COVID, isn't it?
Yeah.
This isn't permanent. Yeah. I mean that, because when
no. As I understand it, it's sorry,
we missed you then.
Oh, sorry. No, as I understand it, it's just because of COVID, but it will run into. Oh, I'm not sure if my connection's stable. It will run into next year as well, and I think the idea is that nobody wants to have that situation where you're weighing up speaking, writing, listening, and speaking, and trying to value one more highly than the other. But I completely agree. I think I'm undersigned on a couple of letters that have gone in to object to it. But I appreciate we're all living through difficult times. It would just be such a shame to see that we all get a sense, I think, as people that work in language learning and teaching, that it's devaluing the speaking skills, whenever actually that is so important, particularly in a world of screens, particularly for younger people.
That's what it's all about. And one of my students recently, who's just left, when she arrived 2 years ago to start the A-level course, she was the shyest person I have ever met, a little mouse. And I really thought that after 2 weeks she would leave, because she just felt so completely overwhelmed, because I was just so, gobby, I think is probably the word I would use. But she stayed for 2 years. And when she left, she wrote a kind of saying that studying French for A-level has helped her to become a different person. And I will carry that with me always, because I just think if you take away that opportunity for speaking, for inventing yourself, for presenting yourself, for looking at a different worldview, then I think you rob people of the complete opportunity to speak another language and embrace another culture. And it takes me back to Nelson Mandela, speak to another person in their language and you understand their heart. And I think our politicians are making dreadful mistakes, and we have to stop them. I think it's time for a revolution. I personally am ready for a revolution in favor of supporting languages and culture, and just thinking outside the box and thinking, just be careful what you wish for, because if you take this opportunity away, then I think the consequences will be long-term and extremely damaging. And
absolutely,
I'm going to stop talking now, because I'm just so incensed about these decisions.
I was going to say, I think this conversation could go on and on and on, and it is 9:15, and match of the day has started. So I think
stop the recording then, Joe. Now.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
I'll stop the recording now, shall I then? And then, okay.
I think so, if that's okay.
Yeah?